I was beginning to get very tired, having nothing to do. I peeked into the book my sister was reading, but there were no pictures in it, and the hot day was making me feel very sleepy and stupid. I couldn't think of what to do, when suddenly I saw a big white rabbit with pink eyes. Now, there was nothing so very remarkable about that, or that I heard him say, oh dearie me, I'm afraid I'm late." I suppose I should have been startled, but at the time it seemed very natural. But when he took a watch out of his waistcoat pocket, I had to follow him. I mean, who ever heard of a rabbit wearing a waistcoat and carrying a watch? I saw him pop into a hole, and of course I followed him. It was really like a well. It was either a very, very deep hole, or I fell very, very slowly. For as my eyes became accustomed to the dark, I saw maps and pictures on the walls, and cupboards and bookshelves. It was all very curious. And I had fallen so far, I began to wonder if I might fall right through the earth. It would be so funny to come up where people were standing on their heads. I kept falling and falling. I wasn't the least bit hurt, thank goodness. And there ahead of me down a tunnel was the white rabbit hurrying away. There wasn't a moment to lose. I could hear him saying, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, I'm so late." And around the corner he went. But when I got there, he was gone. It was a long, low hall with low-hanging lamps and doors all around. But they were locked, you see, and there was no other way out but through that tunnel and up that deep, deep hole. Suddenly, I spied a little glass table, and upon it a tiny golden key. I tried all the doors, but the key was either too small or too large. It didn't fit anything at all. But then I spied a curtain, and I thought that perhaps behind... And goodness gracious, sure enough, behind that curtain was a door, no more than 15 inches high. I tried the tiny key, and the door opened. It led to a passage no bigger than a rat hole, and as I knelt down to look, I could see a garden, one of the loveliest I had ever seen. But I would never fit through that tiny door. I went back to the little glass table, and though I am sure it was not there before, I found a little bottle marked, "Drink me." Now, it's all very well to say, "Drink me," but how did I know it might not say, "Poison," too? But what else was I to do? It tasted very sweet, and suddenly I felt very curious. It seemed to be shutting up like a telescope. Either the table was growing very large, or I was getting very small. Soon I was small enough to fit through the tiny door. But dear me, it was locked, and I had forgotten the key. I couldn't climb the table, for it was made of glass. Alas, what could I do? I spied a little glass box beneath the table. I opened it and found a little cake that said, "Eat me." What else could I do? I gobbled it down. And before I knew it, my head hit the roof. I must have been at least 9 feet tall. I heard the patter of little feet. It was the white rabbit again, beautifully dressed, carrying a white kid glove and an enormous fan. He was muttering to himself, oh dear, the Duchess will be positively savage if I'm late." I figured I had better ask for help, but when I spoke, I so startled him that he dropped the white kid gloves and the fan and scurried away into the darkness. It was so warm. I picked up the fan. I had to think. Everything had been so curious. I hardly knew who I was anymore. I started to fan myself, and the room began to grow. But no, it was me. I was shrinking again, and I didn't know why. Perhaps the Eat Me cookies effect was wearing off. I stopped shrinking, but I was still very large. It was quite a puzzle, and still so warm, I began to fan myself again. It was the fan. I fanned myself furiously until I was as small as the door. But I went a little too far, I'm afraid. I was only 3 inches high. But thank goodness the tiny door to the beautiful garden was open, so I went in. My goodness, directly in front of me on the largest mushroom you ever saw was a caterpillar. And he was smoking a hookah. You know, one of those oriental water pipes. We stared at each other for several moments, and finally he said,
"Who are you?"
"I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning. But I think I must have changed several times since then."
What do you mean by that? Explain yourself.
"I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, because I'm not myself, you see."
I don't see.
"I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly, for I can't understand it myself to begin with. And being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing."
It isn't.
"Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet. But when you have to turn into a butterfly, someday you will, you know, I think you'll feel a little queer, won't you?"
Not a bit.
"Not you, perhaps, but it would feel very queer to me."
You? Who are you?
"I think you ought to tell me who you are first."
Why?
"I can't think of a good reason, so I'll be on my way."
Come back. I've something important to say.
"What is it?"
Don't lose your temper.
"Is that all?"
Now, what size do you want to be?
"Oh, I'm not particular as to size. Only one doesn't like to be changing so often, you know."
I don't know.
"Well, I should like to be a little larger. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be."
It is a very good height indeed.
"But I'm not used to it."
You'll get used to it in time.
Suddenly, the caterpillar climbed down from the mushroom and began to amble away. He just ignored me as he passed, and just before he disappeared, he turned and said,
One side will make you grow taller, and the other side is shorter.
"One side of what? The other side of what?"
Of the mushroom.
I stared at the mushroom, trying to figure out which were the 2 sides. Since it is perfectly round, that is a difficult question. So I stretched out my arms and broke off a bit on both sides with each hand. But which was which? What else could I do? I ate a bit of one and instantly shrank. So I ate some of the other and shot up like a giraffe. So nibbling a bit of each, I finally got back to my own size. I wanted so much to go into that beautiful garden, I headed off toward it. I came to an open place with a little house about 4 feet tall. Oh, it would frighten the people who live there out of their wits to come upon them at this size. So I nibbled some of the mushroom from my right hand and nibbled myself down to 9 inches high. As I approached the door, a footman in livery came running from the wood. I assumed he was a footman by the way he was dressed. Looking at his face, I would have called him a fish. He knocked on the door, and another footman opened it, who looked like a frog.
For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet.
From the Queen? An invitation for the Duchess to play croquet? Ribbit.
The fish disappeared, and the frog slumped down, staring at the sky. Someone had thrown a dish at the poor thing and slammed the door. I went over and knocked on the door.
There's no sort of use in knocking, and that for 2 reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are. Secondly, because they're making such a racket inside. No one could possibly hear you.
Please, then, how am I to get in?
There might be some sense in your knocking if we had the door between us. For instance, if you were inside, you might knock and I could let you out, you know.
How am I to get in?
Are you to get in at all? That is the first question, you know. I shall sit here on and off for days and days.
But what am I to do?
Anything you like, Ribbit.
So, I went in. The Duchess was sitting in the kitchen, nursing what appeared to be a baby. The cook was busy too, but mostly throwing dishes. On a shelf sat a cat with a most curious grin. So I asked the Duchess, "Please, tell me why your cat grins like that."
It's a Cheshire cat, and that's why. Oh, this baby is a pig.
I didn't know that Cheshire cats always grinned. In fact, I didn't know cats could grin.
They all can, and most of them do.
I don't know of any that do.
You don't know much, and that's a fact.
Cook, mind what you're doing. You nearly hit the baby.
If everybody minded their own business, the world would go round a good deal faster than it does.
Oh, just think what work it would make with the day and night. You see, the earth takes 24 hours to turn on its axis.
Talking of axes, chop off her head.
Off with her head.
24 hours, I think, or is it 12?
Don't bother me with figures. Here, you can nurse the baby if you like. He's such a pig.
Oh, you threw him clear across the room. Oh, dear. If I don't take this baby with me, they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Don't grunt. That's not at all the proper way to express yourself. If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear, I'll have nothing more to do with you. Goodness gracious, it really is a pig.
Meow.
Suddenly, out of thin air, the Cheshire cat appeared on the bough of a tree before me.
Are you leaving?
Please, Cheshire Puss, which way ought I to go from here?
That depends a good deal on where you want to go.
I don't much care as long as I get somewhere.
You're sure to do that if you walk long enough.
What sort of people live about here?
In that direction lives a hatter. And in that direction lives a March hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad.
But I don't want to go among mad people.
Oh, you can't help that. We're all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad.
And what makes you think I'm mad?
You must be, or you wouldn't be standing here talking to a cat.
And how do you know you're mad?
To begin with, a dog's not mad. You grant that?
I suppose so.
Well then, you see, a dog growls when he's angry and wags his tail when he's pleased. I growl when I'm pleased and wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad.
I call it purring, not growling.
Call it what you like. Do you play croquet with the Queen today?
I should like to, but I haven't been asked.
You'll see me
Now, where's he gone?
By the by, what became of the baby? I'd nearly forgotten to ask.
It turned into a pig.
I thought it.
I wish you wouldn't keep disappearing and reappearing. Let me see. I've seen hatters before. The March hare will be much more interesting.
Did you say pig or fig?
I said pig, and I wish you wouldn't appear and reappear so quickly. You make a person very giddy.
All right. I'll disappear more.
I've often seen a cat without a grin, but a grin without a cat. It's the most curious thing I've ever seen in my life. I felt sorry about the baby, but if it had grown up, it would have been a dreadfully ugly child. But it did make a rather handsome pig. I started thinking over other children I knew who might do very well as pigs, if only I knew the right way to change them. I walked on a bit and came upon the house of the March Hare. It had to be the right house, because the chimneys were shaped like ears, and the roof was thatched with fur. It was so large, I decided to grow a bit, so I nibbled some of the mushroom from my left hand, until I was about 2 feet high. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea. A dormouse was sitting between them as a cushion, and though it was a very large table, the three of them were crowded at one corner of it. They saw me coming.
No room, no room.
There's plenty of room.
Have some wine.
I don't see any wine.
There isn't any.
Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it.
It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited.
The table is laid for a great many more than 3.
Your hair wants cutting.
Mr. Hatter, you should learn not to make personal remarks. It's very rude.
Why is a raven like a writing desk?
I'll have to think about that.
What day of the month is it?
The 4th, I believe.
Oh, Lord, my watch is 2 days slow.
What a funny watch. It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is.
Why should it? Does your watch tell you what year it is?
Of course not.
Which is just the same with me.
I don't understand.
The dormouse is asleep again.
Pour a drop of tea on him.
Of course. Just what I was going to remark myself.
Have you guessed the riddle yet?
No, I give up. What's the answer?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Nor I.
I think you might do something better with your time than waste it asking riddles with no answers.
If you knew time as well as I do, you wouldn't be referring about wasting it. It's him.
I don't know what you mean.
Of course you don't. I dare say you've never even spoken to time.
Perhaps not.
If you kept on good terms with him, he'd do anything for you. For instance, suppose it were 9 in the morning and time for school. You just whisper a hint to time and whoosh! 1:30 and time for dinner.
But I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know.
Not at first, but you could keep it 1:30 as long as you liked.
Is that the way you manage?
No. We quarreled last March. It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, "Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at." You know the song, perhaps?
I've heard something like it.
So it goes on, you know. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky.
Twinkle.
Oh, shut up!
Of course. Just what I was going to remark myself.
Well, I hadn't finished the first verse when the Queen jumped up and screamed, "He's murdering the time! Off with his head!"
How dreadfully savage.
Ever since then, time won't do a thing I say. It's always 6 o'clock now.
Is that the reason there are so many tea things here?
Yes, that's it. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the cups.
Then you keep circling the table.
Exactly.
But what happens when you get round to where you started?
Suppose we change the subject. I vote the young lady tell us a story.
I'm afraid I don't know one.
Oh. Well, then the dormouse shall. Wake up, dormouse.
I wasn't asleep. I heard every word you fellows said.
Tell us a story.
Yes, please.
Oh, all right.
And be quick, or you'll fall asleep before you finish it.
Once upon a time there were 3 sisters, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well.
What did they live on?
Treacle?
They couldn't have. Treacle is molasses. They would have been ill.
Oh, they were. Very, very ill. Now these 3 ill sisters were learning to draw.
What did they draw?
Treacle,
I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?
From the well.
But they were in the well.
Of course. Well, in. Now, they were learning to draw. And they drew all manner of things. Everything that begins with an M.
Why with an M?
Why not?
Oh, look. He's fallen asleep again. Pour some tea on him.
That begins with an M. Such as mousetrap, moon, memory, muchness. Did you ever see a drawing of a muchness?
Then I can't say that I have.
Then you shouldn't talk.
Take some more tea.
I haven't had any yet, so I can't take more.
You mean you can't take less? It's very easy to take more than nothing.
Nobody asked your opinion.
Aha! And who's making personal remarks now?
At any rate, I'll never come here again. It's the stupidest tea party I was ever at in my life. Then I noticed one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious. So I went through it, and do you know, I found myself once more in that long hall, close to the little glass table. I decided to manage much better this time, so I took the little golden key, and I nibbled on some mushroom until I was about a foot high. I ran through the little passage, and at last, I was in the beautiful garden, among the bright flowers and the cool fountains. As I entered the garden, I noticed a large rose tree that stood near the entrance. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners painting them red. I walked over and watched them, fascinated. Excuse me, would you tell me why you're painting those roses?
Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the Queen was to find it, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So, you see, miss, we're trying to do our best before she arrives.
The Queen! The Queen!
The 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. I looked around eagerly for the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. They were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next came the courtiers, covered with diamonds, and they came 2 by 2, as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came running hand in hand in couples, wearing hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens. And there was the white rabbit that I had chased down the hole. He didn't even notice me. Next came the knave of hearts, and then the king, and finally the queen. I wasn't sure whether I should lie down on my face like the 3 gardeners, for I knew nothing about processional law. And besides, if everyone had to lie down on their faces, who would see the procession? So I stood and watched. But the Queen saw me and stopped.
What's your name, child?
My name is Alice, so please, Your Majesty.
And who are those 3 lying around that red and white rose tree?
How should I know? It's no business of mine.
Off with her head, off!
Nonsense!
Consider, my dear, she's only a child.
Oh, my king, you are probably right. Can you play croquet?
Yes.
Come then.
It's a very fine day.
Why, Mr. Rabbit, how nice of you to say. Where's the Duchess?
Hush, hush. She's under sentence of execution.
What for?
Did you say what a pity?
No, I didn't. I don't think it's a pity at all. I said what for.
She boxed the Queen's ears. Oh, hush, hush. The Queen will hear you. You see, the Duchess came rather late, and the Queen said...
Get to your places.
Everyone ran every which way, but they settled down in a minute or two. It was the most curious playing field, all ridges and furrows. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos. The soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the wickets. I had a terrible time trying to manage my flamingo. And all the players played at the same time without waiting for their turn. Soon the Queen was so very angry, and she kept screaming.
Off with his head! Off with her head!
And the King kept passing behind her, saying,
I pardon you. You are pardoned.
and if not for the King, there would have been none left alive at all. Suddenly, I saw something very curious in the air. It turned out to be a grin.
How are you getting on?
There's no use speaking to it till its ears have come, or at least one of them.
Didn't you hear me?
But where's your body?
I need no more to see or hear you. I asked, how are you getting on?
I don't think they play at all fairly. And they all quarrel so dreadfully, one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular.
How do you like the Queen?
Not at all. She's so extremely...
What's this? What's this?
Likely to win that it's hardly worthwhile finishing the game.
Oh, charming, charming.
Ooh, that was close.
Who are you talking to?
It's a friend of mine, Your Majesty, a Cheshire cat. Allow me to introduce it.
I don't like the look of it at all. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes.
I'd rather not.
Don't be impertinent, and don't look at me like that.
A cat may look at a king, Your Majesty. I've read that somewhere, but I can't remember where.
Well, it must be removed. My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed.
Off with his head.
Perhaps we'd best continue our conversation elsewhere.
Nonsense, my dear. All nonsense.
Ah, here's the executioner now.
Off with its head.
But, Your Majesty, it ain't got no head.
Off with its head.
And be sharp about it, my man.
You can't cut off an head if there ain't no body to cut it off from.
Off with its head.
You can't cut off an head if there ain't no body to cut it off from, can you, miss?
It wouldn't seem so.
My dear, I'm sure you would agree with me when I say that anything that has a head can be beheaded.
If something isn't done about it in less than no time, I'll have everybody executed all around.
It belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it.
She's in prison. Fetch her here.
Farewell, Alice.
It's fading away. I wish it would stay so we can behead it. Ah, here's the Duchess now. Call your cat.
Why, you dear little girl. You can't think how glad I am to see you again.
Call your cat.
Oh, go croquet.
Oh, dear, I'll lose my turn.
Come and talk to me, my dear.
I'm glad to see you're in a pleasant temper.
Well, my dear, it was the pepper. Shouldn't have pepper in the kitchen at all. Perhaps it's pepper that makes people hot-tempered and vinegar that makes them sour. My dear, you're thinking about something, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit.
Perhaps it hasn't one.
Tut, tut, my child. Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it.
Oh, look. The game's going on rather better now.
'Tis so, and the moral of that is,
'Tis love that makes the world go round. Alice, you're thinking again.
I've a right to think.
Just about as much right as pigs have to fly. And the moral of that, oops, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty?
A fine day, Your Majesty. Now take your choice. Either you or your head must be off in about half no time. Take your choice. Goodbye, Your Majesty. Now let's get on with the game.
No, it's time for the trial.
What trial?
Off with their heads.
Off we went to the court. The room was crowded. The king and queen ascended their thrones. All sorts of little birds and beasts, and the full pack of cards bowed low. The knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near him was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked delicious.
Order in the court!
I had never been in a court of justice before, but I had read about them in books and I knew the names of nearly everything there. The judge had to be the king, and he wore his great white wig over his crown and looked very uncomfortable, not to mention unattractive. The creatures in the jury box were very busy writing on slates.
Enjoying yourself?
Oh, Mr. Cheshire Puss, what's the jury doing?
They're putting down their names for fear they will forget them before the end of the trial.
Stupid things.
Silence in the court.
Herald, read the accusation. The Queen of Hearts, she baked some tarts all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole the tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict.
Not yet, not yet. There's a great deal to come before that.
Call the first witness.
First witness, rise.
First witness, the Mad Hatter.
I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, for carrying my cup, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for.
You ought to have finished. When did you begin?
The 14th of March, I think it was. 15th.
16th.
Write that down. Take off your hat.
It isn't mine.
Stolen?
No, I keep them to sell. I've none of my own. I'm a hatter.
Give your evidence and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot.
Let me look at him through my spectacles. Now bring me the list of singers in the last concert.
Give your evidence, or I'll have you executed whether you're nervous or not.
Oh, I'm a poor man, Your Majesty, and I hadn't begun my tea not more than a week or so. And the bread and butter was getting scarce, and the twinkling of the tea.
The twinkling of what?
It began with the tea.
Of course, twinkling begins with a T. Do you take me for a dunce? Go on.
Oh, I'm a poor man, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said...
I didn't.
You did?
I deny it. He denies it. Leave out that part.
Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said... well, after that, I cut more bread and butter.
But what did the Dormouse say?
That I can't remember.
You must remember, or I'll have you executed.
No, I'm a poor man, Your Majesty.
You're a very poor speaker. And if that's all you know about it, you may stand down.
No, I can't go no lower. I'm on the floor as it is.
Then you may sit down.
I'd rather finish my tea.
You may go.
And just take off his head outside.
Call the next witness.
I wish you wouldn't squeeze me so. I can hardly breathe.
I can't help it. I'm growing.
You've got no right to grow here.
Don't talk nonsense. You know you're growing too.
Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace. Not in that ridiculous fashion.
Alice!
Here.
What do you know about this business?
Nothing.
Nothing whatever?
Nothing whatever.
That's very important, jurymen.
Unimportant, Your Majesty means, of course.
Unimportant, of course. I meant, important. Unimportant.
Importantly.
Silence!
Of course. Just when I was
Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high must leave the court. Alice,
I'm not a mile high.
you are.
Nearly 2.
Well, I shan't leave. Besides, it's not a regular rule. You just made it up.
It's the oldest rule in the book.
If it's the oldest, it ought to be number 1.
Consider your verdict.
No. Sentence first. Verdict afterward.
Stuff and nonsense. The idea of having the sentence first.
Hold your tongue.
I won't.
Off with her head.
Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards. The whole pack of cards rose up in the air and came flying at me. I tried to beat them off. My eyes shut tight. When I opened them, I found myself lying on the bank of the brook with my head in my sister's lap. Oh, it had been such a curious dream. That was so many years ago. If I sat by that brook now with half-closed eyes, I could still half believe in Wonderland, though I know all I would have to do is open them again to dull reality. But I tell you my dreams now, and of my Wonderland long ago when I was a little girl, to perhaps share your simple sorrows, or find some pleasure in those simple joys, remembering my own childhood and those happy summer days.